August 1963, Buckinghamshire, England. In the small village of Ledburn, a train coming from Glasgow heading to London unexpectedly stopped in the middle of the road due to a red signal. The second man in command jumped off the train to check the problem. And suddenly, a group of masked men jumped the operators and uncoupled the first two carriages. They drove the train to a nearby bridge, where another group was waiting to steal the cargo. Under the cover of the night, the masked men stood by the second carriage, eager to discover what lay inside its metal doors. Little did they know, it was something none of them would have ever imagined, even in their wildest dreams. Unbeknownst to the robbers, this fateful night would go down as the biggest heist in Britain history, a story of ambition, precision, and personal pursuit to achieve the perfect crime. To understand how this risky plan came together, we have to go back to where it all began. London, 1963. Bruce Reynolds, a career criminal who was known for his daring criminal activities and love of the high life. He was about to receive a tip that would change his whole life. Reynolds was not just an ordinary criminal. He saw himself as a gentleman thug. Inspired by Hollywood heist films, he saw crime as a form of art, a challenge to outsmart the system. He admired the style and precision of cinematic criminals, movies like Rififi and The Asphalt Jungle, both of which depicted meticulously planned robberies. Bruce romanticized in his head the image of the master criminal, precise, calm, and with style. Before this final job, he had already built a reputation for high-stake thefts, carefully assembling a network of skilled criminals to execute his plans. But these plans weren't always perfect. He had several run-ins with the law, and he got caught on several occasions. Bruce was part of a loosely connected group of professional criminals known as the Southwest Gang. Their specialty was high-value robberies. Unlike reckless smash-and-grab thieves, Reynolds and his crew prided themselves on careful planning and precision. During their many crimes, physical force was only used when absolutely necessary. The Southwest Gang had 5 core members: Bruce Reynolds, Gordon Goody, Charlie Wilson, Buster Edwards, and Roy James, each contributing their own unique skills to the group. Like all criminals, the true motivation was the promise of a luxurious, carefree lifestyle, or so they thought. This all began one evening when Goody told Reynolds about a high-value tip, one that could lead to the biggest score of their lives. This information came from an inside source, a man known as the Ulsterman. He claimed to have knowledge of a major cash shipment with weak security, a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Needless to say, Bruce was intrigued. Bruce's second-hand man, Gordon Goody, was the gang's smooth talker. With his charisma and connections, he excelled at gathering intel and persuading the right people. The Ulsterman told Goody that a Royal Mail train traveling from Glasgow to London was gonna carry an unusual large amount of cash due to the bank holiday. This is a public holiday when banks and many businesses close, often leading to delays in cash transfers. The Ulsterman had prior knowledge of the train's schedule, in addition to security procedures, but more importantly, he revealed a critical weakness. The high-value package where the money was stored had minimal security. With this critical tip, Reynolds saw the opportunity he had been waiting for his whole life. This was it, the perfect heist, and so the great train robbery was set in motion. The gang had robbed cars and cargo before, but they had never stopped a moving train. The first step in their plan was to find someone with the right experience. Luckily, Buster Edwards had a connection, a friend in the South Coast Raiders, a gang specialized in train robberies. They likely knew how to stop a train, making them the perfect recruits for this job. Buster was a resourceful, well-connected criminal. He met Bruce in the early 60s, when Bruce sought to expand beyond small-scale thefts. With his network and ingenuity, Buster was the ideal ally. Reynolds and Edwards went to meet the South Coast Raiders. Upon negotiation, they agreed to join. This group included Tommy Wisby, Bob Wells, and Jim Hussey, who were seasoned train robbers. They also recruited a man who was a specialist in rigging the trackside signals. His expertise would prove extremely beneficial in stopping the train. Next, they needed someone who could drive the train. Luckily, Reynolds knew a crook named Rooney Biggs. He brought in a retired train driver, known by the alias Stan Agate, also known as Peter, to keep his identity hidden. After weeks of surveying, confirming the cargo, and mapping the train's route, Reynolds and his crew chose Sears Crossing as the perfect spot for the hijacking, a remote rural location with only a few distant farms. From there, they decided to stop the train, uncouple the HVP carriage, then drive the train to Britigo Bridge, where they would unload the stolen cargo into trucks. Driving the trucks were several gang members, most notably Roy James. Roy James was a racing driver and a getaway expert who had a passion for motorsports and a background in car theft. His driving skills made him essential for the gang, ensuring a swift escape after every job. The plan was entering its final phase, but one crucial piece remained: a hideout to lay low and divide the spoils. While scouting, the gang stumbled upon a remote, unoccupied farmhouse called Leatherslate Farm, located about 27 miles west of Britigo Bridge. It was the perfect hideout to split the loot. It could also serve as a suitable place to lay low and weather the inevitable police storm. Brian Field, acting as intermediary, arranged the purchase of the farmhouse. You see, Brian Field was a fixer, the go-to guy for criminals needing things done discreetly. As a solicitor, he specialized in legal loopholes, fake identities, and shady deals. Gordon Goody brought him in as the operations frontman to handle the legal side of things. And Field arranged the purchase using false identities a few weeks before the robbery. At this point, they thought of everything. They had their exact target, a plan to stop it, a route to move the cargo, and a secure hideout to lay low. To Reynolds, this was the perfect heist, playing out like those Hollywood movies, and he couldn't wait to make history. Depending on the version of the story, some details may vary, but the final team consisted of 15 members. Bruce Reynolds as the leader, all core members of the Southwest Gang, and 3 members of the South Coast Raiders. In addition to Roger Corddry, Ronnie Biggs, John Daly, Jimmy White, Harry Smith, Danny Pembroke, and an unnamed retired train driver. This was the final selection. So, in the early hours of August 8, 1963, the gang loaded their equipment into trucks and set off towards Britigo Bridge. Most of the gang made their way on foot to Sears Crossing, where they would intercept the train. Meanwhile, Reynolds and 2 other members cut the telephone wires in the area to prevent any calls for help. Around 3 a.m., Bruce Reynolds and Gordon Goody followed Roger Corddry onto the trucks, where he climbed the rail. Gauntry, on the other hand, opened the signal box and prepared to rig the signal. Railways at the time used 2 aspect signals, red to stop and green to proceed. So Corddry placed a glove over the green lens of the signal light and connected a battery to illuminate the red light, which will signal the driver to stop. So, in the dead silence of the countryside night, the men waited and waited, anticipating the noise of that diesel engine. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the train approached Sears Crossing and, as planned, stopped when the driver saw the red signal. The second man, who assisted the driver in operating the train, stepped out of the train to use the line side phone and call the signalman, because the stop was not expected. To his surprise, he found that all the lines were cut, and as he was going back to board the train, one of the gang members jumped him, while the rest of them climbed aboard. One of the members James Hussey was then involved in a tussle with the driver. Hussey was ultimately forced to knock him out, leaving him injured. While detaching the second carriage from the rest of the train, the retired train driver climbed into the train, ready to drive it to the bridge. However, having been retired for years, he was unfamiliar with the controls of the new diesel locomotive and was not able to operate it. As a result, the gang was forced to wake up the original driver, Jack Mills, and under threat made him continue operating the train. Carriage number 2, known as the High Value Package, contained 5 postal workers who were busy sorting registered mail in addition to cash shipments. Though they felt the train come to an unexpected stop, they had no idea that a gang of robbers had taken control of the train. After a few minutes, the train arrived at Bridgego Bridge, where the rest of the gang were waiting. The robbers forced open the second carriage, catching the 5 postal workers off guard. Any resistance was quickly overpowered, as the gang took control, ensuring no alarms could be raised. With the workers subdued, they began swiftly loading sacks into the trucks, forming a human chain. Within 20 minutes, they moved a total of 120 sacks out of 128 that were in the train that day, totaling 2.5 tons of cash. The reason why the gang didn't take all the money is actually because of Bruce. They knew the longer they stayed, the greater the risk, so they decided to cut their losses and leave before the police could be alerted. Before leaving, James Hussey instructed Mills and the rest of the workers to remain still for at least 30 minutes before moving, something that would ultimately play a role in the search effort later on. About 45 minutes after arriving at Leatherslade Farm, the gang tuned into police radio, ensuring there were no immediate signs of leak. Confident they were in the clear, they unloaded and stacked the stolen cash. As Douglas and Charles counted the money, they were stunned. The total exceeded £2.6 million, more than double their expectations. Some were overjoyed, celebrating with alcohol and cigars, even playing Monopoly with real money. But the unexpected windfall unsettled others, especially Bruce Reynolds, who feared relentless pursuit by the authorities. What started as a high-profile robbery has now become one of history's biggest heists. After counting the stolen cash, the gang divided the shares accordingly. Each core member received approximately £150,000, while associates were given between £20,000 and £40,000. But their joy was short-lived. While listening to police radio, they learned that authorities were conducting widespread farm searches within a 30-mile radius of the crime scene. Realizing their hideout wouldn't be safe for long, the gang decided to leave the farm the following day instead of after the weekend. Brian Field assisted some members in relocating to safe houses, while the rest scattered separately, now flush with cash. Field assured them he would return with an accomplice to clean the farmhouse, wipe fingerprints, and destroy any evidence. But how did the police get on their trail so quickly? First, the sheer scale of the crime ignited an unprecedented response. The Royal Mail and the British government viewed the robbery as a national embarrassment, and pressure mounted from the highest levels to bring the culprit to justice. With millions stolen from a key part of the country's infrastructure, law enforcement was given extensive resources, ensuring no stone will be left unturned. But what ultimately led to the robbers' downfall was something trivial, meant to buy them time, yet, ironically, it cost them everything. The train workers reported that one of the robbers had ordered them to stay put for 30 minutes, and one even saw the gang flee in 2 Land Rovers. With these key details, the police launched a full-scale investigation, offering a £10,000 reward for any evidence leading to an arrest. 5 days later, the police received a tip from a local farmer, John Maris, living near Leatherslade Farm. He knew it had been vacant for over a year when he noticed unusual activity. Curiosity got the better of him. Investigating further, he discovered 2 Land Rovers and promptly reported his findings to the police. And so, on the 13th of August, the police raided Leather Slate Farm, and the moment they stepped inside, it was clear they had found the robbers' hideout. Mailbags, banknotes, loose bills, packaging materials, and other incriminating evidence was scattered all across the house. But didn't Biggs promise to take care of the evidence? Well, it turned out Biggs had arranged for an associate to clean the farmhouse and burn it to the ground, ensuring no traces were left behind. However, as police activity intensified in the area, the associate got cold feet, and instead of completing the job, he fled, taking his payment and leaving the evidence intact. Worse yet, no one from the gang went back to check. The farmhouse, meant to be erased from history, instead, it became a goldmine of evidence, leading police straight to them. And if that wasn't enough, Reynolds instructed everyone to wear gloves during their short time on the farm. Some of the members, however, took their gloves off, expecting the farm to be burned to the ground, erasing all traces. So alongside the evidence, numerous fingerprints were found on ketchup bottles and the Monopoly set. If police could find a fingerprint match in their records, they could track down the robbers, but that could take weeks. Luckily, they didn't have to wait for long, because exactly 1 month later, 2 of the members were arrested, Roger Corddry and William Bull, who fled to Mormouth, renting a flat and a garage. Their landlord grew suspicious when they paid 3 months' rent in used 10-shilling notes. A 10-shilling note was a common British banknote worth £0.50 before 1971. It was widely used for everyday transactions. The landlord found them suspicious and alerted the police. Investigators traced the money to the robbery, leading to their arrest. Not long after that, 8 other members were identified from fingerprints already in Scotland Yard's records, including Ronnie Biggs, Charlie Wilson, Buster Edwards, Bob Welsh, Jimmy Hussey, Tommy Wisby, Gordon Goody, and Roy James. One by one, gang members were caught, with Bruce Reynolds being the last key figure arrested in 1968 after fleeing to Mexico with his family. He later moved to Canada and then France before secretly returning to England, living under a false identity. But then he was eventually identified and taken into custody. Only 5 guys were never caught. The Ulsterman, the gang's unknown informant, whose identity is still a mystery till this day, in addition to 3 unidentified enforcers brought in as more muscle for the team, and finally, the retired train driver who was recruited by Biggs. And during the trial, all members protested their innocence except one, Roger Corddry, who admitted guilt. They were sentenced between 3 to 30 years in prison, but most ended up serving less severe sentences. The robbery had become the biggest story in the country for quite some time, and some of the criminals, like Ronnie Biggs and Buster Edwards, became celebrities. Many even went on to write autobiographies, such as Odd Man Out, The Last Straw by Ronnie Biggs, and Buster, The Truth About the Great Train Robbery by Buster Edwards. As for the stolen money, only £400,000 were ever recovered. The rest was either spent, hidden, or laundered, never to be seen again.